Hi guys, Mrs. Spurlock here. Welcome to Chapter 6, the last chapter of 7th grade science. Wow, you made it. Welcome. Chapter 6, Lesson 1 is all about fossils, so it's a pretty fun lesson. So when we're talking about fossils, of course, as usual, we have our three big questions. What are fossils? What are the kinds of fossils? And what do fossils show? Hopefully you're thinking right now that this sounds like it's going to be a relatively easy chapter. I think it's certainly easier than what we've been doing with like protein synthesis and DNA replication and those kinds of things. So if maybe you've been having a hard time so far with online schooling and everything, I hope you feel encouraged that this should be a relatively easy lesson, hopefully. All right, moving right along. Our first big question, what are fossils, is a pretty simple answer. A fossil just entails the remains or a trace of any living thing from the past. So fossils don't just include skeletons, they include things like fossilized poop is considered a fossil. You can fossilize trees, you can fossilize tracks, shells, all kinds of things can become fossils. It doesn't just have to be an actual full skeleton like we see in the image here. Our next big question, what are the kinds of fossils? The first bullet point here is actually two kinds of fossils, but they're so interconnected that I made them a single bullet point. Okay, so molds and casts. Sometimes an organism that dies in sediment that can make it into a fossil will leave a mold. And sometimes that sediment fills into the mold and leaves a cast. So the way I remember the difference between a mold and a cast is that a mold is kind of like an ice cube tray, while a cast is kind of more like the ice cube itself. So on the screen, you can see to the left, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but maybe it's recording it. If not, in this image on the left-hand side, you have what would be considered a mold because it's kind of like an ice cube tray for the cast, okay? The next type of fossil is called a petrified fossil. Sometimes minerals will literally replace parts of the cells of living things and leave behind a rock in the shape of the organism. This image here is what's called coelacanth, I believe. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what kind of fish this is, but it's a prehistoric fish and it has been mineralized. If you've ever been to the petrified forest in northern Arizona, then you've also seen petrified fossils there. Carbon films involve an extremely thin film of carbon left behind on a rock where an organism has died. So this flower you see here, it almost looks like it's part of the rock. If you touch the rock, you wouldn't even be able to feel the flower on the flower fossil. Carbon film, they're very thin. Next is called a trace fossil, evidence that a living thing this is evidence that has been fossilized. It doesn't actually involve the living thing being fossilized at all. So footprints, these are really common trace fossils, tail trails, and poop. So this image here is called coprolite, and that is fossilized poop. And then the last type of fossil we are going to talk about is called preserved remains. This is when a full organism is fossilized in resin or ice. And sometimes like frozen soil will also cause preserved remains to occur instead of one of these other types of fossils. So what exactly do fossils show us? Our third big question. The first thing that fossils can tell us about is the past environment. When we look at the contents of the ground, when people are digging into the ground and they're finding things, they can learn things about the moisture levels at different times. They can learn about temperatures from different times and major natural disasters. Another thing that fossils can show us is how living things have changed over time. So I included this kind of silly image here. It's Sid the Sloth, from a single-celled organism all the way to the weird Sid the Sloth guy from Ice Age, right? The process of things changing over a long period of time is what we call evolution. It takes millions and millions of years. And so here is a little bit of a more accurate example of some ancestors of the current three-toed sloth. You can see these two giant examples right here, the Eromotherium and the Megatherium. Yeah, those were huge. They were about 9 feet tall. They weighed hundreds of pounds. And I'm really grateful that sloths are no longer this big. But yeah, go Spurlock sloths. And that is our super quick, easy peasy lesson on fossils for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope to see you at office hours, and I hope maybe you're participating in Spirit Week. I'm wearing my favorite team shirt here, JMPS. I was wearing my Packers shirt, and I decided that I decided to just go with JMPS instead. So that's pretty much all I have. Dr. Quigley and I may do an off-topic Friday this Friday, or we may do it next Friday. If you're interested, I would love to see you guys there. All right, see you later.